Mamoun. I'm the country director for the Center for Civilians in Conflict. I've been working in the field of protection and human rights for the last 20 years in various countries, including those ridden by conflict. First, I want to thank Africans in London TV for shedding the light on the situation in Sudan. It is a situation that is largely escaped a lot of media attention. And I think, generally speaking, many Sudanese feel that their voices are not heard, that they are struggling with this protracted, what now appears to be a protracted conflict that will soon enter its third year of war that has really displaced millions of people and has caused damage and destruction not seen for decades in the country. I think one thing that perhaps wanted to say in relation to the overall conflict is that any effort by the international community is most welcome, whether it's by the African Union, by IGAD, by Saudi Arabia, by the US. But I think the issue is, for many people, is that to what extent those efforts actually speak to what people are wanting to see from these talks. I think what needs to happen is that there needs to be a connection between talks or attempts to have talks and communities on the ground and people on the ground who are struggling daily with basic issues from food to protection. On a daily basis, we hear how people have escaped death and destruction, how people tell us that they were very close to dying on this day, on that day. If you speak to members of Sudanese communities in countries such as the UK, they'll tell you, we live in fear of the next day where we open our phones and we start to see news about loved ones, people who run away, what will happen. And I think that trauma in itself is something that is continuing and is real. This is happening against a backdrop of even almost, no focus whatsoever by the media on Sudan. There is no amplification of the voices of Sudanese people. And now I think it's a situation where people need to have their voice heard. This conflict needs to stop. And also there needs to be a connection between the high level discussions that are taking place and what also people need. And this will mean that there needs to be connection between the different tracks of discussions. First, at the community level, we need to start from the bottom up, from the community level, and then to what we commonly call in our field of work track 2, which is the level of civil society, activism, etc. And then that then needs to then connect with the decision makers who are talking at the higher levels. And I think unless those tracks are connected, nothing will be agreed that is sustainable, that is lasting, because it will lack the most important component, which is inclusivity.
Okay, so let us talk about the hope for Sudan, because Sudan, it looks like it is abandoned.
Indeed.
No peacekeeping forces, no African Union. How do you see the future of Sudan?
Indeed, I think there is we don't see the light at the end of the tunnel in relation to Sudan. Where we go from here, and I think that's partly because we're not connecting to the visions of communities. What do communities want? Do we know? Have anyone asked Sudanese people in Sudan what do they want? And I think has to be the starting point. We need to have a clear understanding of what people are asking for, and then that then needs to be translated at the level of the decision makers, who then have to reflect on what people needs, as opposed to political advantages as opposed to their political standings, or other, could be economic interests, whatever it may be. We know now that even the war economy is very prevalent in the country. So all of these factors take us away from having a peace in Sudan that is reflective of the voices of people.
See, Sudan is not short of educated people. Everywhere I look, doctors, scientists. Uh, why is it that Sudan, no, no, not Sudan, but the authorities, well, the army, why doesn't it have the respect for education or educated people in Sudan, do you think?
I think, generally speaking, we see that the political class in Sudan has very much taken power and have been dominating power and the power corridors for such a long time that it's not seeking to reach out to those people who are educated for their views, or even to see how we can use those capacities of people, either whether they're in the diaspora or in the country, in terms of the vision for what Sudan can become, or even enriching the vision that the political class may want to have in relation to Sudan. So I think there is definitely a disconnect between those factors of society.
Let us talk about the role of women in Sudan.
Yeah. I think one thing that we all see and agree, that women in Sudan, same as civil society, they've been very vibrant, very vocal, and outspoken and critical. But again, at the same time, because they lead that role of being critical, of being outspoken, that has very much put them very much on the fringes of any discourse. We do know that there are women members of political parties and they also play their roles. But at the same time, we also know that these are very few in numbers, and they do not necessarily represent the percentages or the numbers that we would want to see, either from political parties or even from generally from the political class overall.
You see, what I'm realizing is this. Sudan is abandoned. You see, we have
True.
spoken earlier about the African Union, no peacekeeping. What do you think that is, that Sudan is not really getting international help like others? So, for example, you hear Ukraine, um, even Yemen,
Yes,
in fact,
yes,
is
yes,
just
yes.
struggling. So, what do you think that is?
Well, I think it's completely baffling how can Sudan now become almost the biggest humanitarian crisis in the world, but still does not get the right attention. And sometimes I think that the complexities of the situation is a factor, but then also there is also focus on what is what seems to be uh, something that the media wants to focus on. For example, we know that there are certain conflicts in the world that immediately get the attention and those who don't. I work at the moment, for example, in Yemen, and we have called the war there the forgotten war. I think the Sudan war is equally forgotten war as well. And this is the pattern that we have now becoming more and more prevalent, that we see these forgotten crises happening in more than one place, but without the attention that they deserve.
So, do you also think that maybe religion plays a big part? Because you see, the problem we have in Africa is not seeing ourselves as Africans. So when disasters happen into another country, we don't pay attention because it is not, well, we are not Sudanese, we are not
Mhm.
Cameroonian. Do you think, A, religion, or the lack of African unity?
I think definitely we need to have more in relation to bringing Africans together. I think that is not happening as much. For far too long, I think individual countries have been left to their own devices, and we do not see the same level of brotherhood that we see, for example, in other parts of the world. But I think that is something that we hope that there can something be around it. I think in the same way, even in Sudan, we often also say that as Sudanese, what binds us together? This is a question that is still prevalent in our minds. You know, what binds us together is our Sudanese-ness, right? And the same, I think, needs to happen at the level of Africa. I think for far too long, Africa has been seen as this poor continent that requires help and support. It's never been seen as this is a powerhouse, and those people who live in it are together part of this really promising continent, they don't even know each other. We don't really know each other as Africans as much as we would hope, right? And I think that there is a lot of work that needs to happen in relation to bringing Africans together and bringing that sense of brotherhood that is not there at the moment.
Do you think Sudanese, especially from the north, because we know the south is separated, so do you think there is trust among Sudanese, the Khartoum, Sudan?
So I think, in terms of, I think that if you always with Sudanese people, what I find, if you speak to them at the level of in the personal capacities, you will find that there is that level of confidence and trust. Where this confidence and trust starts to break is when we speak about political arrangements, when we speak about the future of the country. Why is that? Because we've had long periods of dictatorship where people have not been able to find their own representatives, plus the fact that we do not have a common discussion between us around our future as Sudanese.
This is the last question. I know we are, but we are doing good.
Okay.
Um, in your view, because you deal with conflict and resolution, what kind of method or how would you approach the idea of actually solving the problems in Sudan today?
I think one thing that we need to start with is that this notion that we can have a quick war and one side will win and this will be the end of it is something that is actually proven to be not likely. So that realization, I think, is the first step for everyone, that we need to recognize that this is not a quick conflict, and that generally speaking, I think there's a UN study that says on average, displacement lasts 14 years on average around the world. So that's something that we do not want to happen in Sudan. If we continue along this line, this is exactly where we're going to end up. And I think we have to start with ending the war and starting the conversation around the shape of the country, the institutions of the country, and the basis for those institutions.